recording, everybody. Hello. Hey everybody, welcome back to my channel. My name is Lauren and I'm a photographer from Portland, Oregon. And today we're going to be doing another behind the edit video, but this one's going to be especially fun because it's a very old image that I made in July of 2016. And I've picked this one out because it recently just got accepted into a group exhibition in Lightbox Gallery at Astoria, Oregon, and the opening is February 10th, so it's coming up very soon, in a mere week from now. So I thought it would be very fun to look through the Photoshop file, see where the image came from, and where it ended up. Let's go ahead and we'll open up our Photoshop file right here. And like I said, I photographed this in July of 2016. I had just gotten married. We had just moved to our first apartment. And so I was like driving around randomly trying to find new places where I could make some self-portraits. So this, I particularly recall getting lost on my drive and finding a big field, you know, next to some houses, and I was like, okay, I guess I've been driving around for an hour, I might as well stop right here and see if I can make an image from it. And most of the time when I'm going out making self-portraits, a lot of the time I don't have a plan in mind. I have no idea what I'm going to be doing. And it was definitely a situation here. I was like, I've got no plan. I'm not sure what photo I'm going to make. I'm just going to sort of let the environment inspire me. So that's kind of what happened with this image. I mean, there were bees around. I was sitting, you know, I did a lot of like hair flip sort of photos because it creates this really interesting movement in the photo without actually having a really solid concept. So I was doing some hair flips and then the bee came up, and then, you know, in Photoshop it all comes together in creating that final concept. Alrighty, so here's the final image. We'll go ahead and I'll give us the full on before. I'm always so shocked at how vastly different the before is versus the after on some of my photos. And this one I was like, oh my gosh, I've changed so much on the image. I mean, even like the arm, I've gotten rid of it. Like all of the coloring is so different now. And of course the bee is in the photo too. And it's fun looking back on a really old image because there's similarities in how I would edit it now, and there's a lot of differences too. I would definitely color grade this a lot differently nowadays. Maybe not so differently, but I would definitely add some more like pinky tones, I think. So first of all, I'm getting rid of the shirt I was wearing so it looks a little bit less distracting. I mean, you know, there's this giant triangle right there that will, you know, we don't want that. And then, of course, I'm just getting rid of some of the distracting elements in the photo. A lot of times with Photoshop, you'll work on a layer and then create the layer underneath it and, you know, to fix the top layer. So this is one of those situations where the bee is right there. That was an actual, like, leaf in the background or a blade of grass, but it kind of gave the bee this really weird halo, which really made it look like I had photoshopped it into the photo, so I got rid of that piece of grass to kind of alleviate that. And then we're adding in the bee as quickly as possible. Whenever I'm adding in new elements or like AI, you know, additions or stock photos or any sort of addition to the image, I'm really trying to add it before I do any coloring, you know, any exposure fixing, anything like that, so that it can integrate even more into the original photo, and that way it feels like it's one solid image versus, you know, I've just slapped the bee on top after I've done all the color grading and everything, and it's very obvious, right? I feel like having as many layers as possible in between, you know, that added element and then the final layer that you do is really helpful. So I've got my bee in right away, and we'll go ahead and zoom in because I'm doing some stuff here in the bee. You can still see, I mean, way back in the day in Photoshop, you would have to like painstakingly paint out every single detail. So I'm doing that. I got rid of the little shiny bit on the bee just because it was like a little bit of a distracting element. And then I think we're going into the editing here, the actual like color grading. So I'm lowering my curves a little bit. You can see I'm kind of this is actually really interesting to see because I'm doing a lot of really funky curves adjustments with my photos nowadays. And so it's fun to see this same sort of element in this really old photo. You can really kind of see it's giving it sort of a gray mottled effect, and that will be fixed later on with some of these other layers here. So we'll go ahead, we're already adding back in that contrast, and together you can kind of see it makes the slightest bit of a difference where it's adding a bit more contrast. It's kind of pushing down the highlights a little bit and not making them quite so in your face, but we're still maintaining that little bit of a contrast there with the other layer. And now I'm really going in and getting it super dark. What I would often do with my Photoshop files is that I would create a hue saturation layer, and then I would work with my curves above that layer to see how the different values would be affected in just pure black and white. That way I don't have to be distracted by any of the colors or any weird color things. I could really just focus on the contrast and the lights and the shadows. So, and then you would just remove the hue saturation layer later on. Wow. So now we're going in and we're adding just more highlights, really boosting up the drama of the photo right here where I've highlighted those light points on the skin. And then I'm kind of knocking it back down a little bit with this hue saturation layer and removing some of the color. And then we've got another hue saturation layer, which this layer is removing some of the colors in the grass as well. So if we open it up, we'll come over here to the yellow. I've really dramatically adjusted the color of that grass. You can see it's a lot more yellow, and a lot more saturated too, but I'm making it this really, really bluey sort of color. And I really loved doing that a lot in my photos back in the day. I even edited my wedding photos like this too. And it gave a really nice, like, creamy sort of feel to the photos. It felt a little bit unnatural, but in a sort of way where you couldn't quite put your finger on it. It kind of created this sort of a little bit of a mythical element to the photos, and I still do it in my imagery today, but I do it a little bit more subtly, because sometimes the green, sometimes I would go a little bit wild with the green. Now we're kind of just evening out those tones so that I match with the background now, and then at this point, most of the coloring is pretty much done. I'm going to be going in and removing any distracting elements. So like that, my arm was a little bit funky. I was like, I don't need that. It's, you know. And then the angle of my arm, of course, made it a little bit funny as well. The line of the arm was probably, you know, it makes sense for it to go all the way down here. So then I was like, okay, now I've got to fix up that arm a little bit. Nowadays we can do this in like 2 seconds with generative fill, which is amazing, but back then I would, you know, take the arm and I would create a new layer of it and move it around and then paint around it and erase the edges. A lot of it was literally just painting with the paint tool and, you know, literally painting and matching the colors, and it was a very fun time, painstakingly painting every single tiny little detail. I mean, no one would ever even, like, really notice that, but I noticed it. And then we're just going in, evening things out, making the lines a little bit straighter. I would do that quite a bit with photos too. And then I'm adding my vignette as well, so we can see we're adding some darkness around the edges right here just to really zoom in that focus on the subject. Not like it really needs it. And in fact, that was always one of my critiques in college too, was that, Lauren, you've got a lot of vignette around your photos, but it's so beautiful. I mean, how can you blame me? And here's where I'm adding in my color grading. I would do all of my color grading with levels as well. And wow, even here I added in a little bit of green and a little bit of pink. Nowadays I do this with the curves tool, and I add in a lot more pink. I love pink. So nowadays I would probably even go something like that even. I would maybe even add some more yellow back into the image too to make it a little bit warmer. And then we've got our other layer here, just removing another distracting element. It's always tiny, tiny things like that that really make or break the image. Now we've got our last few layers. I'm cleaning up. This was kind of a funky area, I thought, so I was cleaning it up a little bit. And then I'm adding in my final retouching sort of layers right here. So I've got my shadows. So you can kind of see it here. It's a little bit less obvious because I did it sort of in the opposite way. But I've colored in all of the shadows right here. And this was a technique that I still do to this day of just helping to emphasize the natural texture of the skin. And it's kind of like makeup but in Photoshop. And a similar thing with the highlights right here. It's literally just painting, it's dodging and burning, honestly, where we go in and we make, you know, the darker parts a little bit lighter by dodging away the light, if we're going with darkroom terms here. Then it's just a matter of doing like the couple tiny little final adjustments. I made, you know, my back, the shoulder blade bone, you know, less protruding a little bit. And then that's it. That's the final image. Again, nowadays I would probably add even a little bit more color grading, especially since I've done like this warping tool right here, or this liquify tool to adjust the photo. I would probably add a couple more layers and maybe even a layer of grain too to make everything feel really cohesive in one photo. So yeah, that's the final image. It's pretty straightforward. I mean, the before and the after, it feels very dramatic, but there's really not a lot of layers to it, and there's really not a lot of change between the first image and the final image. It's really just in all of the vignetting I added to it. But I still really love this photo even, how many years ago was that? I don't even know. I can't even do the math. 2016. 10 years? No, 8 years. It was only 8 years ago, but it's very fun to look back on the imagery I was making nearly a decade ago and seeing those through lines of the work that I'm doing now today as well. It's also really exciting too because, especially in today with a lot of digital photography, you know, the final image oftentimes, more often than not, still stays just on a computer screen, which is really unfortunate. I kind of hate it. So it's very nice that this piece was accepted into a show and that I finally get to see it printed out in person. You know, after 8 whole years, it's finally going to be able to achieve its final form in being hung on a gallery wall. So I'm really excited for it. But yeah, I think that's it. I hope you really enjoyed looking through this Photoshop file. I know I certainly did. Again, it's really fun to see how my style has evolved over the years. And I hope it inspired you as well to maybe look back on some of your old photos and maybe gain some inspiration for new imagery that you can make as well. Or even gain some inspiration for editing techniques too that maybe you forgot that you did. Thank you also so much for just watching the video and taking time out of your day to hang out with me and talk Photoshop for a little bit. And I hope you have a lovely rest of your day. Bye!